Calling the oversight hearing to order. We are in the midst of a couple votes. One just started, and we will have another one when this one completes. So it's a little bit disruptive here this morning or this afternoon, but we're going to make do because we've got a lot to talk about, and it's the business of the committee to just proceed. Today, we're here to learn more about the U.S. Department of Education programs that work to meet the trust responsibility that the federal government has to our Native students in elementary, secondary, and post-secondary education. We spent a lot of time in this committee talking about the Bureau of Indian Education, and that's for good reason. We're going to continue to do so. But we really can't not lose sight of the fact that more than 90% of Native students across our country attend public schools. And the government fulfills its trust responsibility to those students through programs at the Department of Education, in addition to programs at the Interior, at USDA, and HHS. Title VI of the Indian Education Formula Grants Program at DOE represents a significant federal investment in American Indian and Alaska Native students and is a cornerstone of federal Indian education policy. This program helps public schools provide additional tutoring, mentoring, and social support to Native kids who need it so that they can graduate on time. Programs like the Native American Language Grants or the Alaska Native Education Program, which we call ANEP or ANE, connect students to culture to keep them motivated and engaged in learning. And then funding from Title III of the Higher Education Act supports Native American post-secondary educational institutions that allow Native students to remain in their communities, raise their kids, and take care of their families, all while earning certificates and degrees that will help them be better prepared leaders, fill gaps in the workforce, and grow the local economy. These funding streams and many others at the Department of Education are especially critical in fulfilling the federal trust responsibility. And this is particularly important to me because we don't have Bureau of Indian Education, BIE schools in my state of Alaska. And this Department of Ed money has flexibilities associated with it that allows tribes, Native organizations, parents, communities, and families input into the development and the delivery of Indian education programs. Funding like ANEP, for example, has allowed the growth of a number of educational options for kids in my state by funding after-school, summer, and public tribal charter school opportunities. Given the major role that the Department of Ed funding plays in educating the next generation of Native students, I have heard, and I know many of my colleagues have heard, questions and concerns about recent proposals to alter or dismantle the U.S. Department of Education, as well as the recent executive orders calling for federal agency rifts and reorganization plans. So we're here today to better understand the Indian education programs at the Department of Education, how they impact Native students' families, and the schools across our states, and really why they must continue and not be negatively impacted by these reductions in force and the reorganization plans. We need to make progress on the ground, and we owe it to our Native kids across the country. So the insights, the experiences, the feedback provided by witnesses at today's hearing will also help us chart our path forward on federal education programs. So thank you to all of you who've joined us today. I know it's never easy to make the long slog all the way back to Washington, D.C., but I appreciate it, and I'm looking forward to hearing from you. When the vice chair of the committee arrives, he will have an opportunity to make an opening statement. But in the interest of time, what I'd like to do is just begin the proceedings within the committee. We will go in order from my left to right, beginning with Mr. Jason Dropik, who is the Executive Director of the National Indian Education Association here in Washington, D.C. He'll be followed by Sydna Yellowfish, the Director of Indian Education at Edmond Public Schools. You've come to us from Edmond, Oklahoma, so welcome. Next, we have my friend and a friend of the committee's, Dr. Rosita Worl. She is president of the Sealaska Heritage Institute, and she has joined us from Juneau, Alaska. Thank you, Rosita. And Ms. Nicole Russell is the Executive Director of National Association of Federally Impacted Schools, also here in Washington, D.C. And then rounding out the panel is Ms. Ahniwake Rose, who is the President and the CEO of the American Indian Higher Education Consortium, just across the river in Alexandria, Virginia. I would remind everyone on the panel that we do have your full written testimony. It will become part of the official records, so I'd invite you to keep your oral testimony here today to less than 5 minutes so that we've got plenty of time for questions and your responses following. So Mr. Dropik, we will begin with you, and then again, as Senator Schatz comes, we might interrupt the progression of the panel for his opening statements, but please proceed.
Miigwech. Thank you, Chairwoman Murkowski. Minogizhagad, Babami Benes Indigenakaz, Minawaki Dunjaba. Good afternoon. My name is Jason Dropik. I am the Executive Director of the National Indian Education Association. On behalf of the students, educators, and tribal nations NIA serves, I appreciate the opportunity to testify today on Native education programs at the U.S. Department of Education, and more importantly, on the federal government's sacred trust and treaty obligations to Native students. This is a unique moment in time, one where the eyes of the nation are focused keenly on the American education system, and likewise, the eyes of Indian country are focused on Indian education. While conversations are happening across the federal government about restructuring education, strengthening local control, and potentially dismantling the Department of Education, those conversations raise serious questions for Native communities. As you engage in these continued conversations following today's hearing, we urge you to remember the federal government has a direct and unique responsibility to Native students, one that cannot be delegated to the states. Sovereignty is the foundation of effective education in Indian country. Since the earliest treaties, the federal government dutifully promised education to tribes in exchange for land and peace. That promise, enshrined in treaties and federal law, did not come with an expiration date. The federal government works to meet these obligations through three primary mechanisms: Native-specific programs, programs with tribal set-asides, and broader programs that tribal nations are eligible for. And while today's hearing focuses on the Department of Education, I want to underscore that this responsibility of the entire federal government. Native education is supported by a network of federal agencies beyond ED, including HHS, USDA, and Commerce, that cannot be separated from this trust responsibility. The department administers several critical programs that directly support Native students and fulfill trust obligations. Title VI, Part A of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act is the cornerstone. It provides flexible, community-driven, parent-directed support for Native students in public, BIE, and charter schools. Part B and C of Title VI serve Alaska Native and Native Hawaiians, communities that do not receive education funding under Interior. These programs are essential lifelines to communities which would otherwise not be served and must remain intact. Impact Aid is another key program. It was established in 1950 to provide financial assistance to school districts that lose local tax revenue due to the presence of federal or tribal lands. Impact Aid offsets the loss of tax revenue on tribal land, supporting over 100,000 Native students. For many districts, it means the difference between maintaining teachers and/or programs or going without them. Title I and IDEA are foundational to Native education, particularly in rural and low-income communities where most tribal nations are located. Title I supports schools in economically distressed areas, while IDEA ensures students with disabilities receive the services they need, services that are often harder to access in underfunded remote schools. Native students with disabilities face additional barriers, including geographic isolation and a shortage of qualified providers. Critically, IDEA and Title I include set-asides for BIE schools. It is imperative that there remain set-asides for tribal nations, directly from the federal government, for any funding structure these programs may take. We recommend increasing this set-aside to 5% to reflect tribal administrative costs and the lack of tax revenue. This set-aside is not an interest group carve-out. It is critical to the federal government fulfilling its legal and fiduciary obligations. Protecting institutional knowledge is critical. Many ed staff working in Native programs are Native themselves or have long-standing relationships with tribal communities, relationships which are vital to effective program delivery. However, recent executive actions have resulted in some of Native serving staff at Ed being removed or placed on administrative leave. Further, the agencies which have been proposed for relocations have also been cut, threatening their ability to serve the programs they already operate, much less to take on additional ones. We urge Congress to ensure Native education programs are protected. That means safeguarding funding, staffing, and program integrity, preventing funding from being rerouted through states, and conducting meaningful government-to-government consultation. Consultation is not just a legal checkbox, nor it is a responsibility. It cannot be ignored due to burdensome nature. It is the foundation of effective and respectful trust relationships. Each of the programs mentioned today are unique. They already represent local control in our education systems. Tribal leaders, Native educators, and families are the experts in what their students need. Our leaders in our community stand ready to work with you to strategically solve the problems our education systems face, together in a way that best serves our most sacred gifts, our children. Miigwech for the opportunity to share with you. I appreciate this opportunity.
Thank you, Mr. Dropik. Ms. Yellowfish, welcome.
Good afternoon. My name is Sydna Yellowfish. I'm an enrolled member of the Oto-Missouri tribe and a descendant of the Osage, Sac and Fox, and Pawnee tribes. I am the coordinator for Title VI and our Johnson O'Malley program for Edmond Public Schools, and I am humbled to be able to share my testimony with you. Education has always been a core value for our Native communities. This commitment is rooted in many treaties tribal nations made with the United States government, which confirmed the foundation of government-to-government relationships. For example, the 1825 treaty with the Osage Nation established funding support to support schools for Osage children. The 1833 treaty with the Oto-Missouri included funds for the purposes of education. Programs like Title VI and Johnson O'Malley are modern extensions of these treaty commitments, continuing the legacy of education for Native students. I stand before you because of the strength of generations before me. My parents, grandparents, and great-grandparents attended boarding schools such as Carlisle, Pawnee Boarding School, and Haskell Institute. We know these historical education policies led to traumatic outcomes. However, we also know that when policies align with the passion of the people, we witness the determination and resilience of our ancestors. Title VI is vital for our Indian students. Our state has one of the largest Indian student populations attending public schools. Within my school district, there are 1,950 Indian students out of 25,754 total students enrolled in Edmond Public Schools. Our Indian students represent 56 diverse tribes from Oklahoma and across the nation that we work with. The Oklahoma City metro area has 11,000 Title VI students, as determined by our recent tribal consultation. These numbers show the impact this program provides for. Indian students and families that attend Edmond and the surrounding metro area schools reside away from their tribal jurisdiction areas and communities, often limiting access and eligibility to services and support from their tribes. Title VI funds for public school students provide services directly related to educational and cultural needs, a primary reason why Title VI should remain intact. One highlight has been creating and implementing a high school class that teaches our tribe's history and culture. This class was established 26 years ago as a high school credit and is supported by our parent committee. A semester course had to be developed in a creative way that included cultural consultants, tribal representatives, and the partnerships made with several tribes with teaching resources. This class benefits all students by fostering respectful understanding of cultural differences, critical thinking, and cultivating a deep appreciation for our society today. It is also important to acknowledge the school's district commitment and trust in the Indian education program. Professional development learning for teachers in district, statewide, and on the national level are a regular occurrence. In addition to cultural learning, academic achievement and graduation for our students is also a significant outcome. Most recently, our program worked extensively with a student displaced from home during the final 9 weeks of their senior year. For this situation, the staff was able to help this student transition to virtual Edmond by securing the device, supplies, and broadband needed to graduate. Administration and staff worked tirelessly to make sure this student graduated on time. Even beyond the scholastic support, staff was able to intervene when the student was confronted with the unexpected situation and misunderstanding concerning their beaded cap being worn at graduation. Title VI staff handles this situation immediately. This student's commencement experience could have gone from being one of the happiest days to the worst days. Acknowledgement of challenges such as suicide, substance abuse, bullying, homelessness, foster care, sexual assault, missing indigenous children, and the struggle to meet basic needs is evident. These challenges are not just statistics we look at. They are the lived experience of many students. These challenges may not always be fully resolved, and outcomes may not always align with what our families hope for. But the Title VI program helps make each situation more manageable. Our staff works directly with families to do what is needed and to help Native families in our schools feel comfortable. Without Title VI, our students are at risk of continuing to be left behind. Supporting the success of thousands of Native students is critical, and direct funding to school districts should continue without interpretation. I thank you for this opportunity to speak before you. Wadikloki.
Thank you. Dr. Worl, welcome.
Madam Chair, Senator Murkowski, Ahniwake, and honorable members of the Senate Committee on Indian Affairs. May I first thank the committee for holding this critical hearing. My name is Rosita Worl. I serve as president of the Sealaska Heritage Institute, which is an affiliate of Sealaska Corporation. Sealaska was created under the Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act of 1971 to settle our Aboriginal land claims. SHI's mission is to perpetuate and enhance Tlingit, Haida, and Tsimshian cultures of Southeast Alaska. We have been fortunate in establishing relationships with Native entities throughout Alaska and with the Native Hawaiians that implement Native educations funded by the Department of Education grants. We have discussed with them the challenges of Indigenous education and the persistent lack of funding. The fiscal crisis that the state of Alaska has been experiencing has translated into minimal funding for Native education, making federal funding even more important. Despite these challenges, we can confidently state that through our culture-based programs that we have integrated into schools with DOE funding, we have witnessed measurable educational achievement among Native students, as well as improvements in their social and emotional well-being. Through our discussions and relationship with Native Hawaiians, we also found that we share similar priorities, programming, and demonstrated benefits from DOE support and funding. We also share a common theme. Culture-based educational program supports educational achievement. I would like to review key elements of Native educational success. These findings are directly interlinked with support and funding from the DOE and demonstrate the importance of that department. Key elements of Native educational attainment. Number one, DOE support and federal funding were key in supporting the direct involvement of Native entities in their children's education and to actively engage with school districts and school boards to promote and develop relevant educational programs for Native students. Native involvement also supported policy and systemic changes in schools that have come to recognize the importance of integrating Native studies. The data we collected and demonstrates academic progress had largely been absent until Native entities began to receive education grants to develop and implement culture-based programming in schools. Number two, DOE's support and federal funding allowed Native entities to develop culture-based programming and to develop curriculum and educational materials that embody and reflect Native cultures, values, and worldview. Number three, DOE support and federal funding supported cultural orientations and instructions for non-Native teachers and Native teachers training in the University of Alaska system. Number 4, DOE support and federal funding allowed Native entities to establish partnerships and to infuse funds into financially stressed partner school district and the University of Alaska system to support Native education. Today, SHI has partnerships with 15 school districts, 16 tribes and tribal organizations, 2 educational organizations that facilitate the disbursement of funds and program throughout our region. Additionally, we have partnerships with the Bristol Bay Foundation and the Arctic Slope Community Foundation, which are also supported by federal educational funding. While we have made significant progress, Native student scores continue to trail behind reported averages for all students, demonstrating that the need persists for continued Native educational funding. The academic success fostered among Native students can largely be attributed to ANAP, the Alaska Native Education Program. ANAP grantees have successfully intervened on behalf of Native students and families to contribute to their success, both academically and socially. However, we are aware that the level of ANAP funding is not sufficient to allow more Native entities to participate in ANAP. Because of its significant impact in Alaska, SHI has recommended an increase in the 2026 ANAP appropriation to $70 million. I would like to conclude with a recognition and thanks to the Department of Education and its staff for their invaluable support, and to Congress for enacting laws and providing funding to support quality education for Natives and students across the country. With adequate funding, students and educators can have access to quality education and tools that reflect their heritage while equipping them with the skills necessary for future success. Gunachish.
Gunachish, Dr. Worl. Welcome, Ms. Russell.
Chairwoman Murkowski, Vice Chairman Schatz, and distinguished members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today. My name is Nicole Russell. I'm the Executive Director of the National Association of Federally Impacted Schools, or NAFIS, representing more than 1,000 federally impacted schools nationwide that educate nearly 8 million students, more than 105,000 on tribal lands. Federally impacted school districts are those which depend on the continued support of Impact Aid, the oldest elementary and secondary education funding program that represents the federal responsibility to reimburse public schools for lost property tax revenue due to non-taxable federal property, such as Indian and restricted fee land, Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act land, and other property. NAFIS is grateful for Congress's bipartisan support and hopes that strong support will continue. 8 committee members have joined the Impact Aid Caucus, and 7 signed a bipartisan Dear Colleague letter led by Senator Lujan supporting robust Impact Aid funding in FY25. Impact Aid is not a handout. It is a federal obligation born of treaties, trust responsibility, and the unique status of tribal lands as non-taxable. Public schools that serve Native American students and all students impacted by federal lands face significant fiscal disadvantages because they cannot rely on traditional property tax revenue to fund their schools. Impact Aid exists to bridge that gap. Today, we are confronted with serious discussions about the potential dismantling of the U.S. Department of Education and the erosion of federal support for public schools. Eliminating the department would be devastating. In fact, well over 90% of Native American students are educated in traditional public schools. Impact Aid is administered efficiently, sending funds directly to school districts, which allows school leaders the flexibility to make local decisions, precisely the kind of governance many are advocating for today. Many schools that receive Impact Aid are the economic engines that drive that community forward. Impact Aid can be used for any legal purpose, including special education services, transportation, culturally relevant instruction, language revitalization programs, or teacher housing. Moving Impact Aid to a different agency would introduce unnecessary bureaucratic hurdles, result in a loss of valuable institutional knowledge, and lead to significant delays in payments. If the department is dismantled, the very schools that heavily rely on impact aid will be the first to suffer. Despite its importance, impact aid has not been fully funded since 1969, leaving schools struggling to fill those gaps. NAVIS is grateful for Senator Lujan and Senator Tillis's leadership of the bipartisan Advancing Toward Impact Aid Full Funding Act last Congress. Many school facilities serving Native students are in urgent need of repair. Unlike most public schools, federally impacted districts have limited to no bonding capacity to fund school construction or renovation. Impact aid construction grants, funded at only $19 million annually, provide critical funding for infrastructure improvements, yet demand far exceeds available resources. That's why we are grateful to Senator Hirono for leading and Senator Smith for co-sponsoring the Impact Aid Infrastructure Partnership Act, which proposes enough funding for access to safe, modern educational facilities and expands the use of funds to include teacher housing, a major challenge for many Native communities. Impact Aid has tribal consultation requirements, ensuring that schools meaningfully engage with tribal representatives and parents. These policies promote collaboration, transparency, culturally relevant solutions, and equitable access to educational resources. Impact Aid reflects this nation's moral and legal obligation to Native communities. I urge Congress to prioritize and protect Impact Aid, the education of Native American students, the next generation of Native leaders, and the integrity of our nation's promises depend on it. Thank you for your time, your attention, and your continued commitment to tribal lands and federally impacted communities.
Thank you, Ms. Rosal. And we turn to Ms. Rose. Welcome.
Chairman Mikowski and members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to testify today. My name is Ahniwake Rose. I'm a citizen of Cherokee Nation, and I serve as the president and CEO for the American Indian Higher Education Consortium, also known as AHEC. AHEC's vision is strong sovereign nations through excellence in tribal higher education. We accomplish this by supporting our 34 accredited tribal colleges and universities, or TCUs, which operate more than 90 campuses and sites in 16 states. TCU serves students from over 250 federally recognized tribal nations and embody a vital component of tribal higher education. Rooted in treaties and authorized by the Constitution, the federal government's unique responsibility to tribal nations has been repeatedly reaffirmed. These trust and treaty obligations are owed to tribal nations and their citizens and do not have an expiration date. They are also not bound just to the Department of Interior, but extend across the federal government, and education is a central component to these obligations. The federal government has long endeavored to uphold this duty through the appropriations process and through the enactment of such laws as the Tribally Controlled Colleges and Universities Assistance Act. Tribal nations began chartering their own institutions of higher education in the 1960s for two reasons: the near complete failure of the U.S. higher education system to address the needs of, or frankly even include, American Indians and Alaska Natives, and the need to preserve our culture, our language, our lands, our sovereignty. The guiding vision of the tribal college movement is an education system founded on traditional knowledge and focused on a prosperous future through job creation and strengthening our communities. Today's TCU offers certificates as well as associate's, bachelor's, and master's degree, and Dene College offers our first doctoral degree. TCUs train professionals in high-demand fields, including law enforcement, agriculture, natural resource management, information technology, early childhood education, and healthcare. By teaching the job skills most in demand in our community, TCUs lay a solid foundation for tribal economic growth, with the benefits for surrounding rural communities and the nation as a whole. In addition to the over 25,000 attending tribal colleges this academic year, TCUs serve as community hubs, serving over 100,000 community members annually through various programs and services such as our libraries, job training, high school equivalency programs, Head Start, financial literacy, community gardens, and youth and college prep. To administer these programs, TCUs receive funding from several agencies, including the U.S. Department of Education. Our written testimony goes into detail for most of these programs, but I want to quickly highlight the Title III Strengthening Institutions program, which is frankly one of the most important resources for tribal colleges. The core funding is vital to the flexibility and meeting the unique needs of our TCUs. It allows us to purchase and research and scientific equipment, support faculty development, develop and improve academic programs, create and improve facilities for distance learning, and most critically, it allows for the construction and renovation of instructional facilities. For example, at UTTC in Bismarck, North Dakota, Title III dollars support and supplement new construction and rehabilitation projects across their 124-year-old campus. This includes a greenhouse, a cold storage building, and lighting for outside spaces. At Chief Dullknife College in Lame Deer, Montana, Title III dollars fund math and science faculty, cultural staff, and language immersion programs. As Congress begins to consider proposals to restructure the Department of Education and whether tribal-specific programs should be moved to other agencies, AHEC requests that all programs for which TCUs are eligible entities or receive direct set-asides, such as the Title III program, be considered. Any cut in funding, freeze, or delay, or frankly, any TCU-specific funding that is block granted and inefficiently rerouted through state governments would result in drastic cuts to faculty and staff and frankly, threaten our accreditation status. It would also be inappropriate to send funds that are directed to TCUs through the federal trust and treaty obligations to states. AHEC appreciates the Senate Committee on Indian Affairs for hosting this vital hearing, and we remain committed to working collaboratively with the committee as a trusted resource to ensure that TCUs, tribal nations, and their citizens have a voice in shaping their education future. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Rose. We have started our second vote, so I am going to, I think what I'll do is I'll turn first to you, Senator Smith, and then I will ask a question, and then I may take off to vote. We'll work this out, but I want to try to keep us going without having to take a break, if that works. So let's begin with you.
Thank you so much, Chair Murkowski. I really appreciate that. We'll work it all out, and many thanks to all of you for being here. It's a very
Is your mic on, Tina?
Oh, sorry. Very informative and useful panel, and thank you so much, Chair Murkowski. I'd like to start by focusing in on impact aid. And Ms. Russell, I'll direct my questions to you. I appreciate how you are highlighting how cost-effective and efficient impact aid dollars are. And I also appreciate how the entire panel, in one way or another, started with the unique trust and treaty obligations that the federal government has towards Indian education, that this is not a program that can just be cut by somebody, that it is part of our longstanding obligation, too rarely lived up to. So I think that was a really important place to start. We know, as I said, that impact aid is very cost-effective, it's very efficient, and Madam Chair, I'd like permission to enter into the record testimony from the National Indian Impacted Schools Association, which is headquartered in Minnesota, related to this topic. Thank you very much. In this testimony, Brent Gish, who is NIISA's executive director, explains how impact aid is a model for efficiency, as you've just described, and local control, and also how it has never been funded to meet the intention of the program. So, Ms. Russell, what I'd like to ask you to discuss is we have the recent a so-called continuing resolution with funding through the end of this fiscal year. We have the executive actions and their impact on impact aid. I'm hearing that from my local school boards just how difficult it is to try to hold it all together, given what are very serious worries about getting shortchanged. So could you just help people who don't understand this completely, give me some good arguments for why this has such a tangible impact on the ability of schools to do what they need to do?
Absolutely. Thank you for the question. Impact aid is one of the few federal funding programs that is not forward funded, meaning we rely on annual appropriations so that the school districts can receive their funds, which they're still waiting on since passage of the FY 2025 year-long CR. Our federally impacted school districts are we're experiencing serious delays in funding and have been because Congress doesn't pass appropriations in recent years, on October 1st. So these school districts have waited almost an entire school year to receive current year funds.
Right.
And, we expect a couple weeks, from passage of appropriations for the funds to reach, Ed to then be dispersed to the school districts. And once they do reach Ed, they can be dispersed very quickly. And those funds go directly from the Department of Education to a school district's bank account. So it's very, quick and direct funding. Our concerns are we already know that the, passage of the CR and the funds have not gotten to these school districts. They are running into serious cash flow problems.
Right.
And not
This
just
is what I'm
because,
hearing as well.
yeah, not just because of impact aid, but
Literally
other,
can't pay the bills.
right. One, school district in particular I heard from this week, we're talking 3 pay periods away from needing to borrow funds just to make payroll. So these are very dire circumstances that our school districts are facing. And when they so heavily rely on federal funds, like federally impacted school districts, impact aid, and other federal funding programs you've heard about today, these are serious, serious problems.
Yeah.
And we need to make sure that funds are getting to the school districts in as quick a manner as possible.
Right. I think this is something we all need to pay such close attention to. I'm quite concerned about it. Ms. Rose, I want to just take a minute, at the very few minutes that I have left. I am such a huge fan of TCUs, and we have 4 TCUs in Minnesota, and I just had a great opportunity to meet with a graduate of one of them this past week. And I wonder if you could just take the bit of time that I have left to talk about what you are seeing about, these sort of cutbacks at the federal level and the impact on TCUs.
Well, we're so happy to have a fan of our tribal colleges, and thank you, Senator, for all the work that you have done to support us over the years. We're very, very grateful. Our immediate impact that we saw, not only were we on the chopping block right away with the elimination of our executive order, so the loss of the office within the Department of Education was
Right.
Incredibly heartfelt for us, as we lost an ongoing voice that supported our tribal colleges and universities across the Department of Education. But the most immediate impact was frankly with Haskell and SIPI, as they were targeted with the severe loss of staff, 25% or roughly for both of them. We've been able to return those staff, but at great challenges to the school, as the students felt unloved, unappreciated, the faculty felt desperate, a lot of concerns about whether they would be able to maintain their programs or be able to graduate. What you saw was a tribal college community come around and support each other. And so when we say we have a TCU family, that's absolutely what happened.
People mobilize.
Absolutely. We mobilized to ensure that there was faculty present, administrative teams present, and so all there to make sure SIPI and Haskell had all the resources they need. But more largely than that, we're deeply concerned about programs such as Title III. While there is a lot that has been laid out about what the administration would like to see done to some programs and services, there's other pieces within our post-secondary portfolio that we just don't know what the future of is.
Right.
And post-secondary funding right now is not a secure piece. We're also deeply concerned about Pell Grants. 75% of our students rely on Pell Grants, a larger proportion than any other part of the population. And so without consistency in funding, that's going to really impact our students and in turn impact our institutions.
Thank you. I'm out of time, so I want to be
Absolutely.
respectful of the chair's time, but
Thank you.
Thank you for that very good summary in a short period of time.
Thank you for that. Dr. Worl, you have spoken very well about the benefits that we see through ANEP and the reason why we need to be focused on doing all that we can. The average reading scores in 2022 in Alaska for Native 4th graders and 8th graders, well, not just in Alaska, across the country, 14 to 20 points below average compared to all students. And so recognizing and trying to address these gaps, I think, is important. Over the years, I have been the recipient of the Baby Raven Reads program. I'm still working through my first and second and third editions. I think right now I'm on Eagle, which is chalk, I did okay?
Yes.
All right, see, I'm learning slowly, but, you know, I look at what has been done through programs like Baby Raven Reads, where we're working to address phonetic awareness. It's some of the basic things. But when you mentioned that you have 15 different school districts now, many in the southeastern part of the state. I visited the programs there in Juneau, where they have incorporated the native language into these early education programs. Where we are benefiting not only the native students, but also the non-native students within these schools. So can you just share with the committee how programs that are funded by ANEP or the Native Hawaiian Education Grant Program too, how where we are addressing that achievement gap between native and non-native students, and then how this is different really than what is already offered within the school district, how this insertion actually makes that difference.
I think we have to enroll the senator in the Baby Raven Reads.
I think so.
We
From
have
the
30,
very-
we have 30 Baby Raven Reads books, and you've been through 3, so.
I know.
Yes.
I have the more advanced ones too. I'm working on this one.
Senator, the answer to this, I'll try to make it simple, but it is complex, and it's rooted in history. And you have to remember that when schools were first introduced in Alaska in the late 1800s, that the policy was suppression of native cultures. That was the policy. And that continued probably up until the 1960s, when self-determination became a policy of the government. And I think in Alaska, that was also then followed by the Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act, which has a social responsibility also to its constituents. And so they were able to put money into our schools as well. And then we heard this, rally, cultural survival, cultural persistence. And we then began to see measures of improvement in Native education. But it was really when we started to get federal funds for Native education that we saw some real progress in our educational achievement of Native students. And that was largely through a couple of things. Number one, it was the direct engagement of Native people in education. And you have to remember that a lot of our parents were raised in boarding schools, and so they hadn't had the benefit of understanding, learning cultural values and practices, about being engaged in their children's education. So that funds allowed that direct participation of Native entities and Native parents. And then we have Baby Raven Reads, where we integrate Native culture, Native integration of cultural programming into educational curriculum, and then integration into the schools. And, you just look at Baby Raven Reads. It's very different from the books that we grew up with, where Jane and Mary, or Mary and Jane.
Dick and
Jane. Yeah, Dick and Jane. Yeah, Dick and Jane. That was the norm. And so Native people, they saw little white kids doing little white things that little white kids do. They didn't see themselves. They didn't see brown kids. They didn't see their lifestyles, picking berries, going fishing, and things like that. So, Baby Raven Reads, I think, is a really good example of Native programming. And I noted that in 2020, the reading scores improved by 20 points. That's significant. And I have to share with you that today, or as of September 2024, in Juneau, Alaska, in Juneau School District, that Native literacy scores are higher than non-Natives.
Wow.
So I have said this is a model that should be integrated into Head Start across the country. The other part of your question talks about when you don't have Native programming, what happens? Well, we still have school districts that have not integrated cultural programming into their schools. and we don't see the kind of academic achievement, that we see with schools that have that. In fact, we have schools like in Juneau where and this is earlier, where there was schools within that school district that did not have Native programming. We had Native programming in one of the schools, and it was called TCLL, Tlingit Culture, Literacy, and Language. And when we did an evaluation of those students at the end of the year, we found that Native students who attended TCLL, their scores were higher than Native students that did not attend TCL but attended other schools in the same district that didn't have Native cultural program. Their scores were lower. So we know clearly from our data, our evaluations, that the integration of language and culture into schools promotes academic higher achievement and higher school retention and better social and emotional well-being.
Well, thank you for that, and congratulations. That is not only market improvement, but that is really breathtaking when you think about how far you have come. I'm going to excuse myself and go vote. I'll turn the gavel over to the vice chairman, and you haven't given your opening statement. Senator Cortez Masto is next up. You get to decide, and whoever's not speaking can actually read from my collection of Baby Raven reads while I'm out.
Thank you, Chair Murkowski. One of the federal government's core trust and treaty responsibilities to American Indians, Native Hawaiians, and Alaska Natives is to provide education. The Department of Education plays a critical role in fulfilling this promise on everything from impact aid and Indian education programs to Native language revitalization. And for over a century, Congress has passed law after law affirming and reaffirming this federal obligation across the Department of Education, including Elementary and Secondary Education Act, IDEA, the Higher Education Act, the McKinney-Vento Act, Johnson-O'Malley Act, Indian Education Act, the Native Hawaiian Education Act, the Tribally Controlled College and University Assistance Act, and the Native American Language Resource Center Act. Each of these laws was enacted to provide critical support for Native students and schools across the country, no matter where they attend BIE schools, tribally controlled schools, public schools, tribal colleges and universities, Alaska Native and Native Hawaiian serving institutions, or Native American serving non-tribal institutions. Not to mention more general education laws that benefit Native children and Native and unhoused Native children, people with disabilities, and federal loan programs that help 87% of Native students attend college. So what does it mean when the president, by executive order, proposes to dismantle the education department, first by gutting its workforce and then by handing control to the states? Let me start by saying this, and this is maybe the most important thing. An executive order is not a law. It is an instruction about how to implement a law. It can be a powerful tool, but it does not supersede a statute, and it certainly does not supersede a series of statutes. Congress passes laws, the president signs and executes, and the duly enacted federal laws that I just mentioned govern Native education. The president does not get to wash his hands of the federal government's trust responsibility by memorandum. If he wants to eliminate that trust responsibility, he has to come back to this committee and to this Congress. So going back to the original question, what does the proposal do? Well, Native students, more than 90% of whom attend public schools, will be at the mercy of state governments that have no trust and treaty responsibility to meet their unique needs. For rural Native students, eliminating the Department of Education would lead to fewer choices and tremendous instability. High poverty and smaller schools, especially those in rural Native communities, are at greater risk of closing if enrollment drops below the minimum. But do not take my word for it. I'd like to enter into the record without objection the accounts of tribal schools that are operating day to day, not knowing how or even if they will stay open amid the chaos that this administration has caused. I am committed to ensuring federal laws implementing the federal promise of an education to American Indians, Native Hawaiians and Alaska Natives is not broken. We have a duty to fight this reckless plan on a bipartisan basis and protect Native students. And so I thank the witnesses. I apologize for being late. And my first question is pretty simple. And we'll just go down the line, starting with Mr. Dropik. Did any of your organizations ask to dismantle the education department or voucherize its programs? And just a yes or no.
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 No, absolutely no.
No. No.
Thank you very much. Ms. Rose and Ms. Dropik, did the education department consult with the tribes on any of the proposals to date, including dismantling the agency? Ms. Rose first.
They did consult on the EO for vouchering the schools, but they did not consult on the closing of the Department of Education.
And in your view, does that violate the law?
Yes.
Mr. Dropik?
Agreed. Yeah, they did not.
Okay. Ms. Yellowfish, does your Title VI Indian Ed program currently answer to your state?
No, it does not.
Ms. Rose, do TCUs currently have to answer to states on how they spend their federal funds?
No, they do not.
I'll just end with one final comment because between my opening statement and the questions, I've gone a bit long. This is not permissible under the law, and that is not to be dismissive of the immediate damage that it's causing, but I really think all of us have to not obey in advance. One of the president's innate powers, regardless of whether he's in office or not, this president in particular, is to bluff, is to make things seem inevitable or likely, or having momentum that may or may not be inevitable or likely or having momentum. In this case, what he is proposing is no more powerful than a firmly worded tweet. That is not to say it's not having immediate impact, but in the long run, these statutes govern what we do. All of the authorizing statutes and all the appropriations law are what we have to adhere to. We are still a country of laws. And so I know it's cold comfort when you're trying to operate a school and not knowing whether you're going to be able to literally keep the lights on and make payroll. I understand that. But it is worth saying on the record that the law is the law, and an EO does not get to wave away a federal statute. Senator Cortez Masto.
Thank you. Thank you to the ranking member for his comments, and I thank you all for being here. And let me follow up on that, because there is no doubt that the treaties and laws have consistently acknowledged the federal government's commitment to providing education to American Indian and Alaska Native peoples. But let me start with you, Mr. Dropik. For the benefit of an administration that does not believe in consultation and does not want to recognize necessarily those treaties and laws, can you talk a little bit about the Department of Education funding like Title I and like IDEA, and how it actually evens the playing field for Native American students, and how cutting this funding could result in Native children, Native communities being left behind?
Yeah, thank you for that question. And definitely when you think about the impact that has, we know obviously the historical context in which educational systems and the government to government relationships have continued to be unmet, continue promises made and not kept. And when you continue to create cycles of distrust and unmet promises, it has an impact on communities and in those institutions themselves. So when we have programs and institutions and items that help to validate someone's belief in who they are and the validity of their experience, those programs aren't part of the educational system for our Indian students. Thinking back just to my own experience growing up and being a first-generation college graduate in my family, checking a box for other for my ethnicity. Now I'm glad that we've moved beyond that I'm no longer an other, that I can acknowledge that history. That's a really, that's comforting, but it has an impact on communities. And I didn't get that teaching. I had educational experiences within my public school upbringing that didn't validate those experiences. So by bringing in cultural programming experts and expertise in the in the situations, you validate not just who they are and who their ancestors are, who their families are, which we know our communities are vital to who we are as people, but then you also repair some of the harm that has been done, that has been purposefully ripped out of communities. And so those programs, without them, then they don't exist, and then you continue to have the negative impacts that we're seeing within educational outcomes, mental health, and then it impacts industry and economics. It's a ripple effect that goes far beyond just the school building.
And thank you. And in your testimony, you say reliable education data remains a challenge due to the small population size of Native students, and the National Indian Education Study remains the most effective tool for collecting disaggregated Native education data and should be preserved. The National Indian Education Study is conducted on behalf of the Department of Education. So could you elaborate on the importance of reliable Native student data collection and how dismantling the Department of Education would create challenges in obtaining that data?
Yeah, absolutely. Part of it is in the relationships and the understanding of the communities that you're serving. And so when you have individuals who are working within the Department of Education in Native serving programs, they have relationships, they have connections, they have ability to be able to make sure that they're getting information, and they understand sometimes what not other mainstream or those that come from a different point of view might not understand in terms of how to collect data meaningfully within tribal communities. Assuming that one size fits all or one measurement is going to give you all the information, others don't have that knowledge of how do we make sure that we're accounting for all of the statistics and numbers in the communities and the areas in which that we need to. So taking away that does take away that information and further creates confusion around the data and how to continue to support it.
And let me, I'm running short on time, but let me touch on something else that is just as important, is the mental health piece of that. And for our students. And Ms. Yellowfish, I'm going to ask you, if you don't mind, after reading your testimony and your discussion around some of the concerns, really the higher than average suicide rates amongst Native youth.
Yes.
And in my time in the Senate, we have worked to get funding, particularly funding for mental health, into our tribal communities, right? And making sure that these issues can be addressed. And given your experience, can you explain the largest barriers in addressing the mental health challenges of Native youth, and actually how the Department of Education funding and what is happening with it right now may help or hurt us reaching our Native youth when it comes to their mental health needs?
I think that with most Indian education programs, priorities are set before us, and these challenges such as suicide and substance abuse, most recent bullying and sexual assault that we have worked with our students, I feel like we are obligated to address these challenges and work with our students and our families as the best that we can. However, the funding resource, the funding ability has not always been adequate to meet those additional needs, because we're doing cultural and curriculum, we're doing languages, we're doing college and career readiness, and these are already objectives in our grants and what we have. And then our priority this year, much more so, is the social emotional well-being of our students and the lack of resources, the lack of funding. However, with partnerships created with the Indian Health Services, tribal communities, that does and may alleviate some of those challenges as far as funding. Ideally, it would be great if we can each have a social worker or a counselor within our Indian education programs to help specifically address those particular situations.
Thank you. And thank you to the chairwoman.
Thank you. I've heard from several of you that some of the important aspects of, for instance, Title VI, and Ms. Yellowfish, you've kind of spoken to this, is the flexibility that comes with it. I think you, Ms. Russell, mentioned that flexibility was key, and I think you, Ms. Rose, when it comes to the tribal colleges, universities. So flexibility is important. It helps address what you have spoken to, Dr. Worl, which is the ability to shape these programs so that it is responsive to those in the community, in the region, even outside of the school there. There's the discussion with, if we eliminate the Department of Education, what that looks like. Because I think it has been stated, I think it was Senator Smith when she started off her comments, that we have a trust responsibility, and regardless of whether you dissolve a department, that responsibility still stays in place. There are many aspects of the programs that we're talking about here today that are required by law. I mean, you cannot get around the requirement, the obligation, the commitment that we have when it comes to funding for those with disabilities. You can't get around your requirement of the Civil Rights Act for enforcement there. And so what we're hearing is that, well, these would be moved to other agencies. And I'm sure that it is true that for instance, under Title VI, you can move that somewhere else, move it to another department. Again, whether we're talking about Department of Justice, maybe some things move to Treasury on the financial assistance side, maybe some things move to Health and Social Services. Can you all weigh in here and speak to what that actually might look like? What that actually might look like if the programs were not eliminated, but housed elsewhere. Are you concerned that you would lose the flexibility? Are you concerned that I think the issue with regards to consultation, because that's a requirement throughout, is one. But if you can share with me and the committee just some of the either the warning signs, the concerns, or perhaps what you might think could even be an advantage moving out from under the Department of Education to another department. Maybe you see none, and that's fair. Tell me why. Because this is what we're talking about up here on the Hill. So share with me your perspectives. Let's start with you, Mr. Dropik.
Sure, I won't have a great answer for you, but I'll do my best. I think that
ultimately, any of us have real concrete
I think that
answers.
the biggest challenge is we don't know what that plan is. And so in order if there was a plan, and I believe everyone here in this room, whether they're here or not, and all the other ones, they want what's best for communities. They want to see students thriving. I've not heard anyone say that they didn't. And they want to increase efficiency. We want to increase efficiency and make sure that money is getting to students and getting to staff and getting to communities. So everyone's on the same page on that. Now, how do we get there? That's where the consultation, that's where the discussions, that's where the developing of a plan, laying out that plan, and then we can address where are the issues. The hard part is that without a plan that has been laid out, we don't even know where to start hypothesizing, where some of those areas might come up. But we do know that we have seen when actions have been taken without that consultation, then unintended consequences are a result. Then services are disrupted. Then staff are accidentally or inappropriately put on leave. Like, those are real consequences that have impact on people, staff, communities that they serve, and organizations. So in terms of looking at what does it look like through tribal consultation and work with the committees in those programs, those discussions could be had. It can have about what does make sense, what are the unintended consequences that we're not seeing, where are the legal ramifications that might come of that. But without that, then everyone's left guessing. And so tribal consultation would be the first part, a plan being laid out. Then we'd be able to address, is there room for growth? Is there room for efficiency? Without a doubt. So let's come together with tribal communities, with those programs that they serve, the institutions that are served, to have those discussions so that we can work on that together.
Let me shift over to you, Ms. Russell, because you mentioned that one of the benefits or the advantages within impact aid and the way it is structured, it again allows for a great deal of flexibility. And it is significant in terms of budgets. I know that in the Iditarod area school district, this is in southwest Alaska, impact aid makes up about 60% of the funding there. And as Dr. Worl noted, in Alaska, all of our school districts are very, very worried this fiscal year about their budgets. We also have Secure Rural Schools funding, which impacts many of our smaller communities in the southeastern part, which is impacted by this long-term continuing resolution. So there's a lot of squeeze there. But you mentioned that flexibility allows you to do everything from special ed, transportation, and housing. And Mr. Dropik says, we all want to try to get to the money to the kids, right? Money to the kids. But if you don't have housing for your teachers, you might not have anybody to help your kids. And so speak to me a little bit about the concerns that you might have from where you're sitting with oversight of financially impacted schools.
Right, absolutely. Regarding impact aid specifically, we are concerned because school districts are still waiting on their FY25 appropriations, their payments, to help get them through the end of the school year. And we know that they're already trying to prepare for next school year. I mean, many of the school districts have instituted hiring freezes because they just don't know if they're going to have the money. Are they going to have to put projects on hold? Some projects and programs are being delayed. There's so much uncertainty right now, and not being able to rely on that federal responsibility to these school districts is really concerning. The potential, proposal of moving some programs like Impact Aid, if the Department of Ed were to be dismantled, one issue that we see would be very tough and would lead to delayed payments potentially for years is the fact that there are only 19 dedicated public servants who are expert analysts in the Impact Aid Program office who understand this very complicated program. And that staff would need to stay on top of this program to make sure that it continues to be handled in an effective and very efficient manner.
Thank you for that. I was going to ask Ms. Rose a question, but I know that Senator Moran probably has an interest in talking about Haskell.
I'd be educated by hearing your question and their answer about whatever you'd like to ask, Madam Chairman.
I'll give you a break here while you get yourself settled and continue my questions. Let me ask you, Dr. Worl. ANEP, you have sold me on ANEP years ago, and we have seen the benefits in Alaska and Hawaii. What do you think ANEP loses if it is housed elsewhere? Go ahead and push that button.
Senator, Madam Chair, as you heard from my testimony, I'm a fan of DOE. I'm a fan of the way they operate, the knowledge that they have, the relationships that they have established with Native entities throughout Alaska, and also with our brothers and sisters in Hawaii. They are a known entity to us. They understand education, and they have developed processes where where they are sharing the latest scientific data about various aspects of education. They have meetings where project directors from the different programs are able to come together, and we learn from one another. Senator, I'm just absolutely sold that they have developed the process to work directly with Native people. They hear our concerns, they hear our issues, and they're able to convey that to yourself, to our Congress people, and I think they help influence the directions of educational program. So I would be concerned, that if it were shifted somewhere else, we would more than likely that's not their expertise. And so there would be a lag, there would be a period where relationships would have to be established, where they would have to gain the knowledge about the complexity and the importance of education. So I'm a fan of the Department of Education for all that they have proven that, we just know from our evaluations, our studies, that we are making progress right now. And if it went elsewhere, I would be concerned that we would lose that.
Senator Moran, we've had a good conversation around the dais today.
Good. Madam Chairwoman, I thank you for being recognized. I've been a member of this committee on and off. Every time there's an opening, I seek to return to the committee, and I'm glad to be back this year. The last time I left, you were mocking me for being the lowest member on the committee.
You're
And I
still a
hope
long
that I
way
am
away.
treated with greater respect than the last time you were chairwoman.
I want you closer to me, Senator Moran.
Good answer. Thank you all very much for being here. I'm going to address this probably to Mr. Dropik and to Ms. Rose, but I want to talk about Haskell University. We have seen significant needs over a long period of time. We've worked hard to help Haskell address those needs. It's been a challenge because of changing leadership. In recent times, we've had seemingly no capability of getting any assistance from the Bureau of Indian Education. I asked the last Secretary of the Department of Interior for meetings to discuss Haskell numerous times without any success. And the conclusion was that we thought we'd take a different path, or at least test the waters for a different path. And I think Haskell is such a valuable place, such a unique place, such support across the country, somewhat regardless of where I am in the nation traveling. When I'm visiting with tribal leaders, there's always stories about Haskell from them or their family members, and there's a memory and an understanding and appreciation of an asset that, in my view, and I know in yours, needs greater attention. It's the only tribal nations college. It provides Native American students with unique opportunities to pursue tuition-free higher education in an environment that honors and prioritizes Native American heritage and culture. I mentioned the challenges that they have faced. We decided to try a different track. We have released a discussion draft and have been gathering information from the tribal community. And this month, I intend to introduce the Haskell Indian Nations University Improvement Act. This legislation will grant Haskell a federal charter, thereby separating the school from the BIE and entrusting governance to the Haskell Board of Regents, which will be comprised of tribal members nominated by BAA regions. I'm grateful for the support of AIHEC and NIEA in endorsing this legislation. It seems to have broad support from across the country, and certainly all the tribes in Kansas have indicated this is a path forward, and we're going to do everything we can to see that the legislation is passed, but beyond that, and more importantly than that, see that it makes a difference at Haskell University. So I want to outline that because we'd look forward to tribal community support in this legislation, and we'd ask for your help. But I also wanted to ask, with the expertise at this panel, could you speak to the value of passing this legislation, the Haskell Indian Nations University Improvement Act, and separating the university from federal control? Mr. Dropik.
If the senator's okay, I would defer to Ms. Rose to start, being that this is for sure her area of expertise, and I'm happy to join in afterwards. Miigwech, appreciate that.
Thank you. And I'm going to fold in an answer for Chairman Murkowski as well, because her previous question was on flexibility. And that's what your legislation provides, is an opportunity to really think about flexibility. And I want to draw your attention as well to the statement that you made previously about the Department of Interior, because simply moving our Indian education programs from the Department of Education to the Department of Interior and assuming that they have anything or any knowledge of education is a rot decision. I have worked with many secretaries of Interior who were surprised to find out that they have education under their purview. So maintaining our programs at the Department of Ed with expertise is something that would be vitally important. But in specific answer to your question, our board of directors recently passed a motion in March in support of the concept of your legislation, and we were very excited to do so. Our board has talked quite a lot about the benefits that your legislation will provide to Haskell and frankly to the entire TCU community as we work together to support the students and the faculty to ensure that things that just happened, like our staff being frozen or challenges to funding streams because of changes in administration, might not happen. So we stand firmly committed with you and to work with your staff to ensure that the legislation is as strong as it can be, and you have a TCU community that is in full support. So thank you.
Thank you for those statements. As we begin, perhaps midway. Sorry, I'm new on the committee. Perhaps midway in our efforts, as we were trying to find ways to improve Haskell, the announcement of layoffs of staff occurred. We think we now have everyone who is not voluntarily left now returned to Haskell, and we're pleased about that outcome. But it is, and I've had a really good conversation with the Secretary of Interior when he, as a North Dakota governor, had experiences with tribes and tribal education, and I'm hoping that we can develop a relationship with the Department of Interior that is helpful in advancing this cause.
We would agree. We do not believe, and from our conversations with the department as well, that letting the staff at Haskell and SIPI was not premeditated, right? It was not part of the plan, and they've been incredibly responsive in ensuring that they made the course correction and turned around and got the staff back. So as soon as we were able to educate them, really let them know what was happening, I think they course corrected quickly and are looking forward to continuing to build and to have strong relationships with the institutions. We've also been working with the department in thinking through the legislation. And so I think they're really great partners to stand beside you and ensuring that the legislation is as strong as possible. We do have a couple of recommendations, and we look forward to working with you to strengthen it.
I'm not surprised. Instead of asking just for your support, instead of just asking for support, I should have also, we'll take a few more suggestions and methods to move forward before we introduce the legislation. Now, sir?
I appreciate that opportunity. Just would say that NIA stands to help. We also support, obviously, any time that we can get tribal communities to really be, living tribal sovereignty. That is, it fills us up, continues to make our ancestors proud, and really why we're here. And so being able to help support anything that you need in terms of questions or outreach to tribal communities and any ways that we can be support. NIA is also appreciative of your work and really want to continue to help support, improving tribal sovereignty. And then by byproduct of that tribal sovereignty, being able to improve outcomes for the community.
Thank you for saying that. I should have thought about tribal sovereignty. It's been an issue that I've been engaged in and something that's really important to me. And this is, until you said that, I hadn't thought about this as another step forward toward determination by Native Americans about the future of themselves and their children. Anyone else? Yes, ma'am. Doctor?
I just wanted to say thank you to that faculty of Haskell and the various educators who volunteered their time to go back to work, even though they had been relieved of their duties. I just wanted to acknowledge the great contributions that they made. I mean, to me, we read about it in Alaska. We got worried at first, and then we saw, the great work of, those dedicated educators that went back. So I just wanted to acknowledge them.
Doctor, thank you for doing that. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Moran, and you made some reference to, at some point in time, everyone has some kind of connection or knows somebody. In my sit down with the nominee to be the head of Social Security, he brought up Haskell and went on for maybe 5 or 7 minutes about Haskell. So they're all over the place in terms of fans of Haskell. So
I didn't know that. I do know that he spent time in Kansas, but
yes.
I didn't know the Haskell connection. He's called me. I need to return his phone call.
You should probably return his call and tell him you want to talk about Haskell. I've got one more question, and I'll direct it to you, Mr. Dropik, and others may want to chime in as well. But we've heard today, and we've seen in some of the written testimonies, that there's opposition to federal funding going to the states first rather than the tribes or the tribal organizations and to the local educational agencies. And this is kind of following on what Senator Moran just the point that he made about sovereignty and tribal sovereignty, that going to states could be detrimental to tribal sovereignty and the educational programming. And I know that, for instance, in our state, it's been said that we lack the capacity to distribute funding in the way that it's going out now through the Department of Ed, or perhaps that there might be some unwillingness to distribute the funding that's marked for, say, Alaska Native education to the Native organizations or the tribes. So can you just speak further to that point, and then if anybody else wants to chime in, you're welcome.
Yeah, and I'm sure others will have stories around how that could be a very detrimental impact to the ways in which we support education. Obviously, one of the things that we would reiterate is the fact that it's a federal trust responsibility. It's not a state trust responsibility. And when people are talking about efficiencies, I'm not sure how you transfer an efficiency to a different efficiency, and that gets you less or more efficient. So I'd be concerned that that doesn't eliminate bureaucracy in any way. It actually might increase it, along with the potential of how that funding actually gets to the tribal communities. So, going to the states and not directly to tribal communities is definitely not something that we would support. Doesn't in any way, we believe, become more efficient or provide better choices for the communities. They have schools of their choice and mechanisms by which they can enact them.
Very good. Any further comment to that? Thank you. Did you want to jump in, Ms. Yellowfish?
Yes, just real quick. Madam Chairman, I would like to go along with that because right now our direct funding to our school districts is there July 1, so that our school year can begin with the lack of interruption of funding services and moving forward for the school year. So having the state be involved in some way, I don't know how efficient that would be. And so I strongly, urge the committee to consider those sentiments there, and then just going along with the move. Change is good when it's provided in the best interest of those who will be affected. However, if we don't have a plan, it's going to disrupt the continuity of our services already in place, and students and parents are going to be affected with this change. So again, I urge you to hear our stories and our words in support of our Indian students. Thank you very much.
Very good. Thank you. Dr. Worl.
Madam Chair, I'm sure you're aware of the Native people's relationship with the state of Alaska insofar as education, that we had to actually bring a suit against the state because the state of Alaska was failing to provide its constitutional responsibility to provide education to Alaska Natives. Many of our communities lacked schools, and so as a result of that case, we actually, finally got schools in our rural communities. I've mentioned, the funding problems that we have in Alaska in education, but it's a Native community, in my mind, that really suffers, the consequence of that fiscal crisis. We have schools that have been in disrepair. Students should not be in those schools, and it's just we have not been a high priority with the state of Alaska, unfortunately. And then I guess a real case more recently under the CARES Act, there was funds put in that act for Native education, specifically referencing the Alaska Native Education Program. We were pleased to see the money there, but when we approached our government, state government, to try to secure those funds, we were unable to do it. And the only 3 Native entities that received funding under that act were the 3 of us, with 3 regions that persistently contacted the state. So as it is, I just don't think Native education is a high priority there. So I would not support it going to the state.
Very good. Ms. Rose?
I would echo all of my colleagues' statements at the table and add a few more additional things. One, our concern around reporting requirements, and as states would increase and think about changes and the multitude increased probably of reporting requirements, as well as the lack of consultation requirements from states to our tribal nations or to our institutions. And so would we then be looking at 50 different consultations as we're thinking about the rollout of programs? And then what would that do for the continuity of the education services? Our students are very mobile and tend to move from one location to another. And so having some continued continuity between our education programs is really vital. So as we think about the way that these programs would be rolled out state to state to state across our tribal nations, and as you know, our nations cross state boundaries. So what would that do for Navajo Nation, for example, that's in 3-4 states? So I would add that to our list of concerns. Thank you.
Very good. Senator Moran, anything further? Thank you. I want to thank each of you. I appreciate your contributions. I know you represent others behind you. Thank them for their work as well. Obviously, there's a lot in play right now, but I think it was helpful for us as a committee to understand the benefits of some of these programs, whether it's through Title VI, what we have through ANEP, so many of the programs that have been directed to and really intended to benefit our Native students, whether it's at the Baby Raven Reads level or all the way up to our tribal colleges. So thank you for your contributions. Know that this will be an ongoing back and forth, and we look forward to using you as resources. And with that, this committee stands adjourned.